Good afternoon. Welcome to Contact Families webinar on succession planning and handovers. I've just got a little bit of housekeeping to do, so we understand how this is going to go. So just if there's any technical hitches, could you please bear with us? And just to highlight, myself and Bonnie have just experienced the technical hitch trying to get on the internet. So if you could bear with us also around that. If you're joining by a PC or a laptop or a tablet or smartphone, you should be able to see the introductory slides. With regards to the timings and questions, as there are quite a few attendees on this, it's not practical for us to have verbal questions. Therefore, you're going to kind of remain on mute throughout this session. If you've got any questions, please use the question icon on the GoToWebinar toolbar on your screen. This will allow you to type a question into a text box and submit it to the webinar administrator. And what happens is they will send on the questions to us. Myself and Bonnie can receive them, and we may condense some of the questions, or we may answer them during the process, depending on how many are coming through. And we're hoping to answer them at the end of the session. So if you have any questions, as I say, and we haven't had time, because this is going to take us about an hour at time to do it, please we'll send on your questions, and they'll be posted on the Contact Family website and the recording of this webinar, and details will be circulated next week. At the end of the webinar, there's going to be a short questionnaire that will launch. Please take your time to complete this, as it will assist us on future online training events. So good afternoon. And as I said earlier, welcome to our session. And first of all, my name is Lara Roberts. I am currently the South East Steering Group member for the National Network of Parent Carer Forums. Previous to that, I was chair and then co-chair of the West Sussex Parent Carer Forum. So I'm going to kind of give you a bit of brief background before I introduce my colleague, Bonnie. So within my current role as the South East Steering Group member, my job is to advise and support and to ensure the voice of the 19 parent care forums are fed through to the steering group. And we meet together about 3 times a year, but we always meet on the road at a workshop or two. Just to kind of say that, as I say, there's 19 local authorities in the southeast. Some are very big areas and some are very small. So just kind of getting a flavour of how we collate those voices. What else? As part of the West Sussex Parent Forum, we have a steering group, a management team of 8 parent carers, and we have 1 parent carer and 1 non-parent carer advisor who helps be our critical friend while we're trying to work through our agendas. In West Sussex, we have the Parent Forum has about 1,000 members. That is a small group in comparison to the fact that we have about 4,000 statements or educational health and care plans. We have about 25 to 30,000 children, young people on SEN support, and we only have about 100 who can hit criteria for continuing health care, and as well as that, have about 800 with the child disability team. So we're talking about a very large cohort of young people in West Sussex. I'm now going to hand over to Bonnie.
Hi, I'm Bonnie. Until last week I was chair of Kent Parent Carer Forum. So I held a chair position of one description or another for 2 years. So I co-chaired for 8 months and I chaired on my own for 1 year and 3 months. And as I say, I stood down last week. In Kent, it's quite a large county, so it's really hard to kind of travel across Kent in the way that you need to, and to have reps in each area. We've got a fluctuation of steering group members. We've got a hardcore of about 6, but at any given time we can have up to 10. So we've got people that kind of come and go. We've also got a home education rep who isn't strictly on our steering, but obviously because she's a home educator, she's home educating. So she taps in as and when we need to connect with the home education community. do you know what? I can't actually remember off the top of my head what our current figures are, but when the reforms happened, Kent had 7,000 statements that needed to be transferred. So that gives you an idea of the scale, and I'm sure that figure's much higher now.
Lovely, thank you very much, Bonnie. So Bonnie and I are going to try and do a double act together, so we may be nudging each other and prompting each other, so please bear with us. Right, so the aim of this session today is to understand the importance of good succession planning. It's also to understand the role and the qualities and the skills of forum leaders. It is also about identifying current roles, gaps within your forum. So this purpose of the session is to support you with how your forum is working. It's also to learn about different approaches to recruiting active members, as well as reflecting on the practicalities and the emotional aspects of handover. And it's also to kind of think about, you may have information packs of your own. I know that there's a lot of things on the Contact Family website that's able to support you. It's kind of thinking what you need to think about for the future when it comes to succession planning. So, the principles of how we work together. Forums have different structures and different approaches. But we are concerned with the collective voice, and that's always paramount in how we work. And it's about representing, as we well know, a larger voice than just our own, and how does that translate into your management team. It's about listening to our membership and reflecting on my role as South East Rep. Our membership is the 19 local authority forums within those areas have very different issues, concerns, and it's trying to represent and reflect that aspect when I'm representing that group. But it's about taking those main things and that collective voice forward, and it's always about coming back to what are the principles of how we work. Nicely too. Key principles. As you can see, there's a range of key principles there, but I'm only going to highlight a few. These slides are here to kind of help you kind of have a read through a bit later if you want to. So with regards to principles about succession planning, it's about capacity building and learning, giving individuals a chance to learn and grow and develop their skills and experience to help sustain and strengthen their forums. You can only kind of do this with the strengthening of community governance, building a democratic and accountable and stimulating active citizenship, I can't even pronounce that, within your forum to kind of demonstrate the members that we represent at key meetings. So, what is succession planning? Well, the definition is succession planning is a process whereby an organisation ensures that people are recruited to develop and fill key roles within individual organisations. So whilst we'll primarily talk about chairships and about succession planning, this is about your leadership team, your steering group or your committee, as well as chairs. But it's not about having the right people, it's about having the right people in the right place at the right time. So when it comes to forums, what do we need to think about? We need to think about the constitution of the groups or the set of rules, kind of how we work together. Also think about the length of term and committee members and how long they stand for. And you know, we all witness this, and I'm perhaps 6 years into my forum world, I'm perhaps becoming one of those faces that people see around a lot, and it's kind of thinking, how do we move on and how do we get new people in at the same time? So it's kind of thinking about our passion, our commitment, but also thinking about the fact that at the end we are parent carers first. So where do you need to start? And the point of some of this session is just to kind of get you thinking of examples of ways to start. It may be unique to your own area on how you're doing it. So think about what governance is in place. We've already reflected on how your rules and your constitution, what governance is in place, and does it need updating is also something to kind of think about. What qualities and skills are needed within your team? This is really important because forums are an evolving organisation, and we need to reflect that with regards to our skills and our talents. And I suppose the most important question when we're developing this is, what happens if you don't see any leaders, any potential leaders? And hopefully we're going to try and address that in this session. So as I stated earlier, kind of what is your current structure of work? Do you need to consider making a change within your organisation to go forward? And I'm very much thinking about, are you independent? Are you a charity? Are you hosted by a voluntary organisation? And how can you kind of move forward within that context as well at the same time? So when thinking about your future leaders, perhaps someone wants to be can look in and want to be part of the forum, but they're not happy that you're, I don't know, that you're a charity or you're just independent with just a constitution. You know, do you need to evolve as a forum to kind of think about how you kind of engage and bring people into wanting to take ownership and leadership of that forum? And what type of leadership do you need to take forward? And I think myself and Bonnie will be hitting on that quite regularly throughout this session, because it's very important that chairs represent different eras of our time and that we kind of take that into context. So there are many different ways to run a forum, as I've kind of alluded to, and before you engage in leadership change, and as I said, this is about the whole committee, it's not just about the chair. Thinking, have you got a chair, co-chairs? Sometimes a chair works. Sometimes you need two co-chairs, you know, to share their workload. Are you a steering group, or are you a management team or a committee? Or are you a CEO, a chief executive officer, where you've got a board of trustees that you report into? So just think about kind of those structures and whether they're helpful for the future for your organisation. Right, so the purpose of this slide is if we could kind of focus on kind of the leading aspect to it, because I noticed some of the words I don't really kind of agree with in the management bit, but it's kind of talking about how you lead and you manage and where you come to in the middle. So what was important for Bonnie and I looking at through this was about the influence and the inspiration that leadership gives. That inspiration keeps us going when we're trying to push forward the participation movement. Also think about risk and change seekers. Sometimes sitting on a management team, it can be a bit of a challenge to see somebody say, oh, let's do this. But as a collective voice, you kind of agree with that. But chairs particularly need to have that risk and change seekers approach. Be proactive. Think about the future. So it's good that you're all on board. Think about succession planning already, because being proactive is the key instead of just reacting to a situation. And then for us, we also thought about asking questions. A leader should be asking questions all the time off the management team, off the committee, and how do you do that? So please use this slide how you think will be appropriate for your organisation. So some questions for you just to think about. What type of what leadership style does your forum need? Think about this moment, but also think about in 2 years' time, what type of leadership does that forum need? Also, how democratic, how equal is it? This is the foundation how we work. So when we're able to sit at meetings with our local authorities, at government meetings, we're always able to say, well, within our steering group and our management team, these people have been elected on and they are the voice of that membership as well. So it's about that equality, but it's our foundation of how we kind of move forward. You will not end up hearing my voice all the time. Bonnie will interlude in a minute. But just lead in your forum, just some points. There's another slide that's currently on there at the moment. We're just going to highlight just a few. I don't know if you want to kind of add into some. Yeah, Bonnie?
Yeah, there's built an environment that fosters open learning from mistakes and experiences, and that's really, really important, because as a forum, we don't always get it right. As chairs, we don't always get it right, and it's really important that actually we can make those mistakes and learn from them, but also not be judged within them, because, you know, if we do that to ourselves, or if we do that to members of our steering, that sort of sets a tone that's not really conducive to co-production.
And following on that, there's about developing mutual trust and respect, and I suppose there's a reflection that I don't think, this is just my personal opinion, as having worked in this field for some time now, that we would not all be together had our children not have additional needs and disability. We all come from different flavours of life and different experiences, so it's kind of, It's about developing that mutual trust and respect within your leadership team is so important, because you may not agree with them, but you'll go with that collective voice, and it's having the space to do that and reflecting that we're all very different individuals with different circumstances. It's also about fostering inclusion and understanding and appreciation of different needs. And that follows on for the trust and respect. And how do we do that? And how do we, per se, as reps, as who are responsible, kind of take that on board? And it's about full participation of members by using a range of techniques, knowing what different characters sit around our management teams and committees, and how do we support people to get their voices heard.
Okay, so within the forum, there's also other roles other than, sort of chair. So you've got treasurer, you've got secretary. I'm just looking through the listing, which ones I've done or do. So I do the Facebook pages now. I'm not chair and things like that.
So I think perhaps, Bonnie, if you could just share with us kind of your experience of where you started on your committee.
Excellent. So I was probably the least likely person to end up as chair. Basically, when the chair that I took over from made it clear that she needed to go back to work, so she was going to step down, it was really hard to fill that position. It got to a point where nobody else actually was willing to do it. So you ended up with me, and I was the shortest serving member of the steering. I think I'd probably only been on the steering group for about 6 months. I had the youngest child, or the youngest child with additional needs on the committee. He was in preschool at the time. I had the least experience, I had the least knowledge. I was probably the least likely person to have been chair. So that just shows it doesn't actually need to be the longest serving member. It doesn't need to be the person that knows the legislation back to front. It doesn't need to be that person.
Thank you very much, Bonnie. So we kind of discussed that, and we thought that was a good example of, don't make assumptions when it comes to our leadership team. So with regards to planning, if you know you're heading, if you know where you're heading, it's easier to identify the right people in the right roles. Involve other people. Sometimes having a critical friend sitting on your steering group is always helpful to kind of say, have you thought about this, or have you thought about that direction?
We actually have our IASK service. I think it's IASS across the rest of the country, but we've got to be different in Kent. And that who serves as that sort of critical friend external organisation for us.
And within West Sussex, our balance point, our place to go, who is that critical friend, is part of a voluntary group who comes and sits on our steering group. So that's helpful from different angles to bring that forward. And if you see throughout the slide, it's kind of thinking about where do you go, when you need to start, where do you need to go. So you can use associate support through your Contact Family grant. You can find someone in your area, through your local authority or your community development organisation. And I think Bonnie and I have just reflected those examples of how this can be done. And but see if people are interested and see the potential. But my personal feeling that sometimes it's only once you're in kind of that core group that you begin to understand how forums work and begin to see where your place is to help develop it. Thank you. So including your plan, there are several kind of hints here: training needed, information needed, steps to find new members or committee leaders. Our current chair in West Sussex tasked us a few years ago to find new members for the management team, and she reflected back to us that perhaps we all knew somebody and each of us should ask somebody new, and that's the way we got new people on board. And that was a really simple idea, and we're thankful that she directed us that way. But it's thinking about time scales, give yourself plenty of time, and it always comes to the caveat with forums that stuff happens in our lives and our young people, and that we may have to step up pretty quickly, and you just need to consider those in your succession planning. and kind of thinking when you're going to review the outcome of what you need to do in your plan and take it forward. Reflecting on roles is quite important. Have you got someone who's got a number of jobs within their role? Is it doable? So do they have some people work within voluntary organisations or they work for a local authority? How do you support them to be empowered to have their voice as a parent carer at the table and think about boundaries? And what does the leadership do? Can their role be chunked down into manageable works of areas? So instead of everyone saying yes or being taken all the actions, where do their talents lie and where they're best to take forward? And what do you need to take this forward? As the predominant role of forums is voluntary, do you need a paid member to kind of support develop this way forward when it comes to roles? So the next slide is just trying to support you to think about understanding the gaps within your whole management team, and not just about chair. So think about the management team, the steering group, the committee, the board of trustees. Think about the gaps on the team. Who might be leaving? Is someone's young person coming to the age of 25? Do you need to start thinking about who needs to be there? Or do you have representation for under 5s at that table as well at the same time? Who's shown interest in stepping up, or who can you nurture and support to step up? But we'll need a few years to get there. So if you just identify the gaps on the team, identify the key talents. We all have talents as individuals. Think about what's unique to that person and where they're best support.
And I think a good way of doing that is actually finding out what that person did before they had children, before they were a parent carer. What were their jobs? Because actually that's something that when I took over as chair I realised I didn't know. I didn't know what in a former life all of my steering members did, so I didn't know what their strengths were until I asked.
Yeah, thank you, Bonnie. Identify key people within the wider team and stakeholders. We have a lot of representation that goes out to attend meetings, but they're not part of that management team. Is anyone that you think would like to come into the management team to understand the structure of how forums work and kind of understand that strategic engagement, and can you kind of use this time to bring them in a little bit more? And then reflect on the personal motivation of why you want those people in. And this is that self-reflection on us as current management team. Why do we want those people in there? What do we think they bring in? And what's the best way forward? And ultimately, once you've done that, understanding the gaps, bring it back to the team for a discussion. So some forums need to identify the skills of the existing members of, as Bonnie's alluded to or just told us, of the existing members and the gaps. And sometimes think about who's worked in banking, who could be good for finance, which I know tends to be one that comes up quite a bit. Who's good at public speaking, research, writing policies, procedures, and just think about kind of those things. And there's a fine balance within the forums with us being professional at the table with who we engage with stakeholders, but also kind of retaining our grassroots experience at the management team as well, and trying to bring all those talents at the table at once. So you should be able to see on the website a forum skill audit handouts, which will be able to support your thinking around the skills gap. As you can see, and probably all very much know, that there's also skills and knowledge within the forum with regards to kind of not only chairs and financial, but also minute taking, facilitating meetings, and just kind of look at those lists of things and kind of think, who's got those talents, and or who would like to do those, and how can I support as a committee to support them to make that happen. Well, the next part is about identification, and this is kind of channeling in on kind of your chair roles or your co-chair roles. It's again kind of going back through the circle, identifying the gaps within them and what's needed, and it's very much reflecting, we're here now as a forum, but where do we want to be in a year's time? Identification of key talents again, identification of key people within the wider team stakeholders. So they may not be sitting on your management team, but they could be, like Bonnie, quite fast-tracked into the chair role. And it's also kind of reflecting again on not only your motivation for doing for wanting that person as chair, but also reflecting their motivation for wanting to be chair as well at the same time. And I think that's kind of important on how you drive forward within leadership. And then, again, it's about sharing back with the team, because it's not just, it's your collective responsibility. So how is the next question. So I'm just kind of reflecting on this this part, the second point down. Don't look at a clone of you or your team, and that's really important. And my personal reflection on that is I was very much a crisis chair. I took over in the forum in a bit of a crisis, and my role was, along with my co-chair, was the support and kind of make things just a little bit smoother. And the next person coming along was appropriate to take that leadership forward and to take that forum in the way that they perceive.
And that's very much what happened in Kent. I think the chair that I took over from, again, came in at a time of real crisis and real change. And, you know, it was nice for me that I didn't have to come in with that crisis. Actually, you couldn't get two more different people. But that's the strength of it.
Yes, and that we've got this pool of people that show these different talents and different leaderships in different times. Set up a small, start small and work up, thinking about kind of how you get that message out, and I think it's being transparent with your membership as well, that you're looking for a chair and not being seen, or they get up to something in that corner and we don't understand. So transparency is really important, but when it comes to thinking about people with potential, start to buddy them, not so much just nurture them more than praise them, and just kind of work along with them and show them how forums work and what you've learned and what knowledge you can pass on, and encourage and champion people to step forward to be future leaders. The next part of this is kind of looking at kind of the detail of the roles of chairs, and the reason why we put that in is just so you can kind of have an idea of the detail that goes into it, because it's fine talking in a wider view, but some people need to see detail of what's expected of them. So within a chair role, it's about chairing meetings, but it's about helping the committee to work together as a team. Remember that we are quite an eclectic group at the same time, but having an overview of what's going on. And some forums differ with a lot of work that includes partnership agreements with their local authority or clinical commissioning groups, but some forums focus on the work that they do direct from their contact family grant and how to make it forward. And just thinking that these are the main three things that a role of a chair kind of do, but I'm sure feedback will show that we do a lot more than just physically sit and chair a meeting and bring people together. It's about the background stuff that goes on at the same time that these slides perhaps don't reflect. So the role of a chair is to lead a forum, to ensure effective relationships between the committee and staff members. You may have staff members that as a committee, as a voluntary group, you look after. That the committee may have external partners and wider membership. It's about being a figurehead as well at the same time, and acting as a spokesperson when appropriate. It's also, well, willingness to lead the organisation and recognising when a chair has gone into burnout, and hopefully by succession planning you won't get to that point. But it's about having possession of tact, diplomacy and powers of persuasion. But I'm sure as forums we all relate to that when it comes to our external relationships. And it's being brave and making tough decisions as well at the same time, but also delegating when you can. The next part of this is the role of the chair of trustees, and this is about trustee boards that look at a part of charities, and it's kind of thinking about their roles and how they move forward. It's so thinking about commitment to the forum and the aim, so it's always coming back to the vision. What's the vision of the charity? A willingness to devote necessary time and effort, seek constructive debate and dialogue around difficult issues, but above all, I suppose it's the accountability of the trustees, especially when you have not only volunteers but you also have staff members to take into account kind of ways forward, and that kind of sits within that becoming part of being a charity. And another role that seems to be coming up around forums around the country now is the role of the Chief Executive Officer. So this is ultimately the difference between the others is this is a paid role, and that they're accountable and employed by the trustees. but they have a lot of responsibility to provide leadership for the forum, to ensure that the Board of Trustees is fulfilling its responsibilities and governance of the charity, because you have the Charities Commission that you have to feed back into, to work with the board and manager to achieve strategies and plans and targets. And it's kind of making sure that they are the figurehead and spokesperson, and that they need to kind of pull it back in and feedback in and work with the Board of Trustees on ways forward. So why are we doing this? Why are we thinking about leadership change? Well, it's to maintain a healthy forum. No, I know that was the reflection of the Children and Families Act, it's not 25, but a lot of us think, you know, our children are teenagers now. Is it appropriate for me to be part of this organisation when my children are 24? I don't personally think it is, but it's just kind of something to think that how do we evolve? How do we move the forum forward? Think about different leaders at different times. And, you know, our young people become adults, and we have to reflect that as well at the same time. I don't know if you have anything to add.
Yeah, I mean, I sort of viewed the forum as a living organism in its own right. So, you know, in order to keep our steering healthy, we have to introduce new people. In order to keep the forum going, we have to introduce new members. So it stands to reason that you would need to introduce new chairs, because the landscape changes, things change. What I brought to the party as chair, it's done its job, and actually now it's time for someone else to do something different, to take us to the next level, because I was the right chair for the right time, and now I'm not, and it needs somebody else.
Lovely, thank you, Bonnie. So I suppose the big question for most of us, and I think we've all come across it when we've been part of the forum, what happens if you can't find a new leader? So it's again reflecting on the forum structure. Is it appetizing to people? Would you want to come on board? Do they see us as a very closed group or an open group? How are we perceived? And kind of reflection on what we do is quite important to kind of see why leaders aren't stepping forward. Refresh the top table. New members or steering groups bring different talents and different experiences, and it also brings different debates to the conversation. See potentials in others. I think we reflected on that a bit earlier, and start to nurture leadership over a few year period.
I think in Kent we really had an issue with this, in that, you know, when the chair that I took over from said she was going to stand down, nobody wanted to take it on because it felt like this gargantuan task that nobody could possibly do, that nobody had the time to do. And to some degree, I was kind of guilted into it, because and sometimes that's what we have to do, because it got to the point where we were actually going to close. We had our CAP advisor at a steering meeting saying, if you haven't got a chair, you've got to close, and that's, and I said, okay, well, I'll do it. But that's why part of my job as chair was to make the chair less, in some respects, to dish out more work to others, and to make it less of this horrendous task that's going to take over somebody's life, so that then I could give it up, because I would make it attractive.
And Bonnie's going to speak about her experience in a few moments. So another thing to think about is invite associate in the steering group to support the steering group and advise you, and reflect on how you value each other as a leadership team, and could lead collectively. And I know of a few instances where there are management teams or committees that don't have a chair. They have a participation officer, and they lead as a collective, as a management team. So that's just another example of how this could look. So I'm going to lead nicely onto that too. Bonnie's going to just share a few moments about her experience, as she's already highlighted.
Yes, I have written some notes, and I've got a horrible feeling I might be a bit disjointed because I'm sat here. So bear with me. As I sort of said previously, I kind of was thrust into it in some respects, and I was happy to do it, because to some degree, though probably unbeknownst to the rest of the steering, I had chaired other things before. So it was a case of, I'd always looked at it as just not now. It was something I was interested in, but not now, because Logan was at nursery, but you know, life conspires sometimes, and I say yes quite far too readily, perhaps. So as I said, it was a scary prospect, sort of taking over not just taking over as chair, but taking over from a chair that had chaired for a long time. And it was 5 years, and she was really, really, really good. So it was kind of quite a scary prospect, really. As incoming chair, you've got to trust that you've been told everything that you need to know, and that you will be supported, and that it'll all be fine. And to some degree, I think both ingoing and outgoing is just a massive leap of faith. I think as well, we didn't have any succession planning in place, so I think that probably made it worse when she wanted to step down, and again, nobody wanted it. So that was the first thing I did when my sort of training session was over and I took over a solo chair. I kind of came in saying, do you know what, I'm going to be leaving in 1.5 years. Because I wanted everyone right from the start to understand that I'd only signed up to this for a 2-year period. I had to be very clear in my mind how long I was going to be chair, and in my mind 2 years was long enough for me to come in, do what I wanted to do, and to have completed that, and then to leave, and for a new chair to come and take the forum in the direction that they wanted. And 2 years seemed like a good time for me. I felt like that's how long I could do it without being burnt out. And I felt like that was long enough for me not to feel any kind of ownership on the forum. I think any longer than 2 years, it would have felt like mine, whereas 2 years it didn't. And so that for me was a nice period, and I think that's possibly what the new chairs are thinking as well.
So how's it looking forward? I mean, you stepped back last week, did you say?
Yeah, yeah.
And how did you engage the new co-chairs?
So basically, right from the start as well, I had a hit list, if you like, of people that I thought would make great chairs. Maybe not great chairs immediately or at the time, but certainly people that I looked at and went, yes, they would be fab. And you know, there were people that I thought, you know, I want to nurture them, because actually with a bit of confidence they're going to be great. So I wanted to kind of really foster what we had and make people feel like they could get involved, that they had something of value to add to the party. Now, handover-wise, I literally spent 1.5 years saying, I'm going to step down, so you all need to start thinking about who's going to replace me. I stepped down in December the 1st. So summer, I was saying, right, September, I need to know who's going to take my place. So by September, we'd found, in the middle of that, I had a completely different co-chair as well, albeit briefly. But, you know, life happens sometimes, and, you know, her life when she came into it changed, and she had to step out again, but she's still a really valued member of our steering, which is great. And she sees herself as a chair in the future, so that's fantastic. And I think when you're doing your handover, so we had 2 months to hand over, and so, sorry, cat jumped up there. So we had 2 months to hand over, and I think it's important to say as well that the process of handing over is not just for the incoming chair, but it's also part of the letting go process for the outgoing. And I think if you're finding it hard to let go, say so. Be honest about it with the incoming chairs, because it will make it much easier if you just say that you're just finding it a bit tough. I took them to meetings, I took them to the conference, I introduced them around, and I think I sort of took the burden of responsibility of making sure that all this ran smooth, of setting all the dates, of saying, right, this is how it's going to happen. I took that on myself, because I think that is the burden of responsibility for the outgoing chair, not the incoming chair. Because as I said earlier, as an incoming chair, you're already trying not to step on toes anyway, let alone then setting dates to step down.
And Bonnie, how did you think the local authority reacted to this? Because sometimes, just a probing question, sometimes local authorities get so used to one person being about all the time that the moment you say, oh, we've decided our democratic process that we need another chairship up, how did the local authority take to that? Because sometimes they appear more nervous than anyone else.
That was absolutely the case. Previously, we'd only had the chair go into board, so actually the chair was the only person in the forum that they knew. There was one member that I think it was one of the first things that I was taken to as co-chair, and it's the first time I've met anyone from the local authority, and they turned around to me and they said, you know, oh, we're really very nervous about, you know, there's only coming, and so, you know, they are nervous, bless them. So that was what happened when I was incoming. So when I was outgoing, any meeting, right from the minute that I started taking the new chairs to meetings, and we started doing that really early, we would introduce ourselves as, I introduced myself as outgoing chair, they introduced themselves as incoming chair, so that then the local authority got used to the idea. You know, they thought, and also we'd been sending 2 people to each board anyway. For the last sort of year. So then the local authority need to understand that the forum is always more than one person, and I think that's a good way of doing it. And I think, you know, expect your new chairs to do things differently, and in fact I'm going to be quite annoyed if the new chairs do it the way I did it, because I was right for that period of time, and that period of time's gone and I'm not right now. It needs something different. But I think some chairs can find that quite difficult to sort of, I'm sure it's perceived as, you know, this is the work I did, and they're sort of washing it all away, but actually that needs to happen. And
so can you give an example, and I know that how the practical parts of it, because there's not only as chair, it's not only dealing with your own area, it's also dealing with your region, and it's dealing with those outside commitments that chairs tend to do. How have you found the balance between the new co-chairs and yourself?
Yeah, I mean, the fact that there's 2 chairs coming in is ideal. I think for us in Kent, we should double up on everything, because then, you know, one can step away from the table if life happens, and, you know, no balls are going to be dropped. There's a division of work that's really quite simple. We also took some tasks. When I took over as chair did everything. And that's not healthy at all. So we now have, we pay them to do our admin. When I stepped down as chair, I retained all the boards that were in my hometown, because it doesn't make sense for chairs to be coming from a different town when I'm sat in the town. What else did we do? Admin got taken away, boards. Really, their job is very much more now strategic, forward thinking, where are we going? And then, you know, everyone else can do the work, but we need someone to steer the ship, and I always felt that that wasn't possible if the person that's supposed to be steering the ship is also the person doing everything. That's not going to happen.
Thank you, and I believe, you can correct me if I'm wrong, that you will carry on attending the regional events, and you will feed back to your chairs now, so that they don't have to worry about that childcare commitment. For those who don't know, Kent is very large, and kind of getting that time out to have that responsibility and childcare can always put a lot of pressure on forums when they're meeting in the region.
Exactly, until or unless they choose otherwise, because actually if they get sort of a little way down the road and go, do you know what, we want to go to those, fantastic.
Brilliant, lovely. Thank you, Bonnie, for sharing that experience. Right, so we've kind of started on the handover, and we want to give you some time for questions as well. So I'm going to zip through the next few slides, and Bonnie will join in, no doubt. So thinking about handover considerations, and these are just kind of a checklist for you to think about. Allowing the chair to step back for at least a few months is really important, as what this means is, for me personally, I stepped back for about 4 months from going to management team meetings, because I needed to let the new co-chairs get on with what they had to do, but also I have my own thoughts that I need to step back and not be seen as much. So that was personally quite good for me.
We haven't done that. We did that. Basically, the person that I took over from, she stepped back for a bit. I haven't. I personally didn't feel the need to, and I double checked it with them whether they felt the need for me to. They said no. So
you've got 2 different experiences there, haven't you?
Yeah.
It's recognising where the person's at, isn't it? And there's also, I think you kind of hit upon the point of helping the chair to let go in some way at the same time. And consider that, you know, they've got a unique talent around something, and that they can get on, if they want to, only if they want to, they can carry on with a bit of piece of work and still be feeding into the management team that way. Also think about incoming chairs, come to support them, allow partners to meet them. That's really important, that local authorities, CCG, see that we trust this person is coming in to lead us, and that they need to as well. Identify training. And also helping chairs to link with other fellow parent care reforms in your region is quite helpful, especially if you're a big county or a small county. There can be some learning there, and you know, kind of accept that you're starting kind of thinking that about what the forum's done and what their achievement, kind of, but where they're going to go, and kind of think about the achievement that those chairs and the incoming chairs will bring towards the to the forum, should I say. Handover, so here's the practical bits about it. You're thinking about the bank signatories, the equipment aspect, commitment spend, accountants, policies and procedures, because you're part of a leadership team, you're not just the co-chair or the chair. Another part is that emotional aspect, and it's just kind of thinking that, you know, how do we let go, or I disagree with what's happening. It's kind of that self-reflection aspect. And just kind of think around this slide, and kind of just some of the comments in here that, you know, I have to step back, but how do you support people to have self-reflection as well when it comes to that emotional stuff? Because we're all committed, and we care about forums, and that's the reason why we feel so passionate and deliver some of the madness that we all deliver, the collective voice together, which is really great stuff, but it's also thinking that emotionality can kind of hold us back as well at the same time. So a quote from Buddha, because that's quite appropriate. Leadership skill is about letting go, and you can only lose what you cling on to. So it's kind of thinking what your perceptions are, and it's about that self-reflection. Another slide looking at positive change, about positivity of change. It's kind of new beginnings. What can somebody bring to the table, and how can you move forward as a collective voice together? And I think self-reflection is something that we need to kind of teach ourselves, and we all do it quite differently, and it's kind of, do you need a bit of support on how to do this? Does the whole leadership team need a bit of support on how to do this? That's part of your training.
I was going to say that's part of what the forum needs to be doing as well.
Yeah, part of your succession planning.
Yeah.
Okay, so think about time for change. It's what has the forum achieved? What have you achieved yourself? What have you learned? My recollection is I was nurtured by my previous chair, and she said, you can do it, you can do it. Somehow her propaganda, I began to believe that, and I took forward, and what could you achieve, what have you achieved for yourself? I found myself doing things that I would never think I would be doing from when I started in the beginning, and it's what those things I've achieved for myself personally, and how can I take it into my career and my future learning? What have you learned, what have you gained from involvement? Who's championed and encouraged you on the way? It takes certain people to be sometimes within the local authority, but you know, it's more about people within your own collective group, your own clan, as well. I like to think of forums who have championed you and pushed you forward. And kind of what are you moving to? Making the process easy, and welcoming new committee members, and as I say, making us feel like a cliquey group. We're not cliquey groups, we're just so busy getting on with what we have to do, but how does it seem to the outside? Look as a reflection on your own organisation, and keep on communicating. So, I think pictures say it all, you know, praise in public, because people do great stuff. And thinking about ways forward. We're just looking at your questions. Have we got quite a few questions, Bonnie?
I'm just reading through them.
So we'll let Bonnie read through this, and I'll just talk about the practicalities. Look at form equipment, change of bank signatories, policies and procedures, as I've said before, usernames, passwords. You know, we don't want people kind of think about who created your Facebook account, where does it belong to, checkbooks, bank statements, invoices, all information relating to your Department of Education grant that comes through Context Family, and the other forum invoices, and your spend around that, any office storage keys, and until you've had a successful handover taking place, in good practice for outgoing officers to remain responsible for any forum equipment, information, access, and that's about the trust.
So just quickly going on to the questions, I think this first question is one that you can probably answer. How do you set up protocols that ensure that a parent forum works with contact the family throughout a handover if new parents do not regard this as important and feel that they already have an understanding of parent participation?
Okay, so it's about having a collective view of parent participation, I would say, and it's about bringing them with you, being their buddy, making them, not quite sticking to them like glue, but sticking alongside them until they kind of, you don't get participation, I did get participation in the beginning, but it's only by going along with someone all the time and being reinforced that way. So kind of reflecting on that question, for me, it's about making sure you're with our person and getting that collective understanding of participation. And then perhaps it's about challenging if it is about their own individual stuff, but you can only do that in a safe environment within a committee and to hear different voices. Or it's about thinking about, is there somebody they know that can help support them to understand what this is about. So I think it's ever evolving around protocols, because that sounds really formal. And you know, when you're a parent caring for this new world, you don't think about protocols and criteria and all those words we tend to hear along the route. So it's kind of looking in your succession planning about what happens if you come across this. I think it's my answer at the moment, but I will ponder on that. And I will share any reflections back to contact the family. Okay, so handover form, good practice, have a form, but you know, forms aren't for everyone. We're all different learners as well, so how could you do something in a very creative way instead of just a checklist? But I suppose there is the practicalities, because this is your funding and it comes from the Department of Education, and it's kind of thinking about, we have, you know, this is taxpayers' money, we are accountable for it as a collective at the same time. It also helps things where things go wrong, such as the bank signatory leaves without the bank know, and we know banks take forever to change signatories, for keys to be cut, thinking about keys to the office, passwords have not been changed, and you know, sometimes it can be an abrupt ending with forums. It's getting less these days, but sometimes shares have left in abrupt ways, and it's kind of thinking how you manage that.
I think there's so much as well when you hand over. So I sat down when I was sort of handing over this time and you know, tried to think, but I'm sure there was stuff I missed. So actually it's important as well to sort of, even if you are stepping back, and still be accessible, because things come up, and you know, there was a couple of things I forgot to add them to,
and on your list is getting in contact with your parent participation advisor as well, who supports you with the grant, and just kind of think about, they're the most important, one of the most important, bar the committee first of all to go forward. So as you can see on that slide, that's kind of thinking, and there's a link for you to support you with that as well at the same time. Induction pack, we're just highlighting some few things that you need to think about having in an induction pack. Copy of a grant form, which is really good because it's kind of getting the whole collective to understand the grant form, not just 2 or 3 people. And I've highlighted this one, keep calm in a crisis, because I've just kind of alluded to that. It's getting less these days, but sometimes it's really hard for people to leave forums as leaders. So it's kind of thinking, what do you do in an emergency? When you gather the emergency committee together, sometimes in your constitution it says how many days, but you know, you've got to think flexible and practical at the same time. Is it during the holidays? All those things, but you need to kind of come together as a collective, because this isn't just 1 or 2 people's responsibility. Make sure passwords are held by more than 1 person, which is good practice. What do you need to decide together? Who takes responsibility for what? So someone could deal with the bank issue, someone could deal with social media, passwords. It doesn't have to be just 1 person. What are your priorities? And then talk to your advisor. They'll be very helpful in kind of giving you thoughts of what good practice and how to get through this, and also your local authority to help them understand what's happened. But you don't have to give them your life story, but just give them some headlines on what's going on, so they countersign your contact family grant, the DFE grant. So there's kind of just some highlights if you want to take around emergencies. I keep on forgetting to press the button when I talk. Sorry about that. So So put on your agenda, make sure succession planning's there, make sure it's everyone's responsibility, not just the chairs, because the chair role, as Bonnie's already said, can seem like a really big role. So you need to kind of break it down. Make a plan, check actions regularly, keep an eye out for talents. We all see them out on the road when we're out there, and put on leadership training. And yeah,
well, just about the talent, I think, you know, the two parents that I had sort of in my mind tagged as talent are the two people that have taken over from me. So it does work. It's just they need a bit of nurturing, a bit of cajoling, and maybe a bit of guilt and arm twisting at the end. But
I wouldn't advocate for the guilt bit. We've got enough of that going on. We're being carers. So what do other forums do? Well, they can hold open days for learning about how forums are meeting the committee. You know, make us accessible. Don't make people think, as I say, I keep on, you're missing out on all our hand gestures here, myself and Bonnie, but it's kind of thinking about kind of that we're not just tucked away in the corner. We are parent carers, and we do know that experience, and bring us out, get our heads up from all our work and come out to meet our wider membership. Hold training days, back to active members. Sometimes they just need to come along with us, you know, they're waiting for us, they're waiting for sometimes you can't wait for the right gap to open up. Sometimes it depends on your personalities, but if you think there's a gap coming up, bring somebody along with them. All committee members are tasked with finding someone to get involved. I just gave you an example of that. Speaking about the forum's positive role, it's very hard after, I think some of the challenges of the implementation of the Act is, you know, we're saying kind of, you know, we need to do more, we need to do that, but think about and reflect what the forum does and, you know, how participation supports kind of that wider voice. And just kind of advertise everywhere.
Sorry, just going back to your last point, you know, be prepared at points to reevaluate what the forum does and how the forum does it, because the landscape changes so much, and we have to be reactive and responsive to that.
Yeah, exactly. So, kind of, and there's a highlight of on that slide. I told you I keep on forgetting the slide. Is that this is about kind of what other forums do. So, kind of put the word out and put it out. If you're linked up to the NNPCF close website, you could just ask that question there. So, thinking about there are other webinars out there to support you, building active members, committee roles, responsibilities, make your case, safeguarding for parent care forums, social media and how it can work for, and the role of the treasurer is a role I know that comes up quite frequently. We have another question. What is the optimal number of members on a steering group or management team? Now you kind of have to look at your constitution to decide that, and you may need to evaluate that, but it's also thinking about managing kind of how you chair that as well at the same time, and it's also thinking about your quorum and your voting. So what I would do is I would go back to your constitution. I would not personally, and this is me personally, would not say more than 10, just for managing expectations, as we've kind of spoken a bit earlier about. We're all different characters and we all have different expectations. Once we get into the swing of it, what would you say?
Yeah, I mean, because Kent's so big, one of the issues we have is how many people can get to any given steering group meeting. So we always sort of had absolutely no more than 15, because by right only 10 would come. So we almost sort of wanted more people than we knew would come to try and guarantee that there was always this rolling. But yeah, there's normally 6.
And when you're thinking about voting, if you decide your quorum, think about if your critical friends who are the parent care, is it the majority of the parent carers who have the vote? Can the associates vote on that group? So you need to kind of look back at your constitution and just kind of think about kind of, is this right for us at the moment? And do we have our quorum? Who do we need? Do we need 3, 4 to vote with? Think about how big your area is. So I would just go back and reflect on what it currently looks like, and is it appropriate for now? Cool. Right, we're nearly coming to the end. In fact, we should be at the end. We're getting to the swing of this now. So there are handouts available, committee members information forum template, forum skills template, roles and responsibilities, template asset register, and handover template, and they can all be found on the Contact Family website. So I'm going to kind of leave you with just a quote. great things are done by a series of small things brought together. Vincent van Gogh, just thinking about, you know, we're doing good stuff, we're a participation movement which takes time to move forward, but great things are being done by forums, and I'm very proud to be part of the forum. And it's kind of, but you know, things happen in small ways. So I'm just going to see if there's any other questions. And as I say, if you've got any more questions, type them up and we will respond, and they will be on the Contact Family website with this webinar. So if you've got questions, as I've just said. So thank you very much for listening today. I hope you got some new information out of it or more thoughts. And I just sit down and reflect as a group where you want to go and where you want to be. A short questionnaire will be launched at the end of this webinar. Please take your time to complete this, and it will help us kind of think about what you need as forums for the future, including other topics. This recording, presentation, questions and resources are all on the Contact Family website next week, and we will send out an email confirming what is available. So thank you very much for listening today, and it's Friday, and I hope you all have a good weekend with your families. Thank you.
Thank you.